Shema Hashem, Na'aseh v'Natzliach. Here we are, holding today on the 14th shir in the Hilchot Shabbat of the Tzurba Merabanan series. We're in volume 17, the Paris family volume of the Lax family edition of the English Tzurba Merabanan. And this is the 6th shir in volume 17 and the 14th shir overall in Hilchot Shabbat. And the distinction today is that up until today, we were dealing with the assays, with the positive commandments of Kiddush, Havdalah, Suda, of Shabbat. And today we are starting the Lota assays of the Shamor, right? You have Zalchar v'Shamor, and we're starting the Shamor part of Shabbat, which someone else say it's the meat and potatoes of Hilchot Shabbat, because we're on page 245. Because L'maaseh, the majority of Hilchot of Shabbat deals with the prohibitions, the 39 Melcahot that a person would be forbidden to perform on Shabbat. So we're starting on page 245, but before we get into page 245, it's actually from the Hakdama on Shabbat from the Mishnah Berurah. But right before this part that's brought here, I just want to mention three little parts that the Mishnah Berurah brings up until this point. So outside for a moment, first of all, the Mishnah Berurah says that we have to pay attention. What is the punishment for someone who is mechalel Shabbat and there's witnesses and everything to that? What's the punishment does he get? What type of mitah?
Correct.
Karet is if there was no witnesses, and if there's witnesses,
Stoning.
Chayav skila. What do we say stoning is? It's the worst punishment. It means it's the strongest punishment. That means it's the worst sin, right? So Mishnah Berurah wants to bring you to that idea first. That someone with Mechal Shabbat, with witnesses and everything there, he can be Chayav skila. So that's how important it is. It says next. He says if a person doesn't keep shatnez, or a person doesn't keep kosher, he becomes a mumar for that mitzvah, right? For that mitzvah, he's considered someone who rebels against Hashem. But there's two halachot that if someone doesn't care about them, he becomes a mumar kol Torah kula. What is that? Two averot that a person is over, he's considered a mumar kol Torah kula. Shabbat and avodah zarah.
Yeah.
Because that's how great Shabbat is. It's not one mitzvah. It's the entire mitzvah. It's the entire Judaism is somehow encapsulated in Shabbat. The Mishnah Berurah continues and tells us that we know there are 248 assays, 365 lois assays, and they represent to the limbs and to different parts of the body. But he says you have to pay attention. You know, the body has different types of organs and limbs, right? Chas Shalom, someone didn't have a pinky, he can live. Someone's missing his toes, he can live. Someone's missing his knee, he can live. But there are certain parts of the body, like the heart, like the lungs, like the brain, that if they're not working, even if his pinky is good and his knee is good, he's dead. Right? The vital organs. So says in Mishnah Berurah, well, guess what? Hilchot Shabbat is those vital organs. Right? Those vital organs that they compare to 248, 365. Shabbat is one of those vital organs. If you don't have it, you don't have life. Therefore, it's very important to be able to keep the Hilchot of Shabbat. And now we're going to start on our page in 245. Mishnah Berurah continues and tells us, Chut Shminat Shabbat kalacha mo'il limchol lo kol monotav. Person keeps Shabbat correctly, it's mochel him on all his averot. Right? It's like a vital organ, so it's like it fixes everything. Even if he is sinning like the dor enosh or doing about a zara, mochelin losh. Never asher enosh yaseh zod ben adam chasek ba shomer shabbat mechalalo v'shomer yadam asut kol ra. If somebody keeps Shabbat, it's mochelo. So somehow Shabbat is able to erase a person's all averot. How can a person come to keep Shabbat in all its pratim, all its little pieces? He says the eitzah is, what does he have to do? He has to be very careful to learn the laws of Shabbat. to know what's asur, what's mutar. Dilav hochi, because if not so, if you yimod kol in your name musarim, you learn all the musar and all the shmirat Shabbat, you have to keep Shabbat and this and that. So we're going to the Abshit says, "B'sefer Yerot Devash, ki avshar klav v'mitziot she'inatzel mi'isu Shabbat and lo yamot kol dinim amorim hetiv hetiv." So you're going to the Abshit. It's impossible to keep Shabbat unless you learn Hilchot Shabbat very, very well. Right? You can learn how important it is to keep Shabbat, and you can learn all these different things. But if you don't actually know what to do, then knowing to do it is not good enough. Right? You have to actually. Like some people just plan, but they have no details on how the plan's going to happen. I need a plan. I make a plan, right? But they have to have the details, and this is what Hilchot Shabbat is about: knowing about the details. And says the Mishnah Berurah, one of the reasons why he wrote the Mishnah Berurah, right? First of all, Mishnah Berurah took how long took Chafetz Chaim to write the whole Mishnah Berurah? It took him 26 years. Okay, and we know that why didn't he start it? And he writes over here as well. He says one of the factors that prevent the people from preventing the world from knowing Chol Shabbat is that it's very complex. And it's hard for people to understand. Unless you know the Gemara, the Poskim, you open the Shulchan Aruch, it's very hard to understand. And he says, no one has time today. Right? He's talking about 100 years ago. Chafetz Chaim lived. No one had time then. Imagine that's today. What time we have? And then those man, and in our because of all our sins. So and then he says Levad Mashiesh Kama Chiluke Deos Ben Apoiskim and plus there's so many different opinions in every single piece. And he says Lazot, because of this, he stood up and with Hashem's help, he came to clarify the halacha. Kol Din V'Din B'Ta'amo, everything because of its reasoning, its justification, in the poskim, the Gemara, and they apply conclusion of the Achronim to every detail. He says that's why I came to write the Mishnah Berurah on Shabbat, so people can know, because it's very hard to learn it without. Right, and then he says that he has hope. Whoever's going to learn halacha yadak kol din b'tamo b'mukol halacha l'maisa. He says it's proper. V'nochon v'chol yira v'cheret. Now all the charedim, all those who fear Hashem, they do what? Lechonen chaburot, lilmod hilchot Shabbat kedei shel yichshlu b'am. You have to make chaburos. You have to make groups learning together in order to learn Hilchot Shabbat, and it's based on the midrash the Yalkut brings in the Reish Parsha Vayakel, the beginning of Parsha Vayakel. Right, Vayakel starts off and talks about Hilchot Shabbat. So he says, "Oh, Kodesh Baruch Hu Moshe, asel lecha kihilot gedolot." Hilchot Shabbat. You have to make big groups and learn Hilchot Shabbat. And if you keep Shabbat correctly, you know it's going to bring the Geulah. Right away, they will be redeemed. So that is the Hakdama of the Mishnah Berurah in learning what's Isur and what's mutar when it comes to Hilchot Shabbat. So we start off now on page 247. We're starting off with, we all know that there's 39 melachot, and we know that we have avot and toldot. Okay, before we get into avot and toldot, if a person has shalom is over an av melacha on Shabbat, the Rambam tells us it's not just a lo ta'aseh. It's actually both. It's an aseh and a lo ta'aseh if the person mechel Shabbat. Right. So let's see the Rambam, source number 2. Shivita b'shvi'i, resting on Shabbat. Nemalacha mitzvat aseh. It's also a mitzvat aseh. Shenema, because it says ubiyom hashvi'i tishbot, and you should rest on Shabbat. And so it's an aseh. If you're not resting on Shabbat, you're over an aseh. Bechol ha'oseh bo malacha. Vital mitzvot aseh, ba'avar alot aseh, and he's also being over alot aseh. Shneimar lot aseh kol melacha, don't do any melacha. So here the Rambam tells us that a person who's over a melacha on Shabbat, he's being over the mitzvot aseh of resting, and the mitzvot lot aseh of not doing any melacha. Okay, now these 39 melachot, we already saw in the previous classes that women have pretty much the same dinim for the men on Shabbat, because we say Zachor v'Shamor, because whoever has the responsibility for Shamor has the responsibility for Zachor, right? So anyone has responsibility for keeping Shabbat, the Lota says, and the mitzvahs of Asay also. So now we're going to come and see the source where the women have the mitzvah of the 39 melachot, also refraining from work. So here, Mesach Kiddushin, we have a Mishnah, and the Mishnah says, "V'chol mitzvot lo ta'aseh." Whenever it comes to a negative prohibition, don't do something. Ben shehazman grama, ben shelo hazman grama. Whether it is time bound, whether it is not time bound, on page 248, 48. Echad anashim, echad anashim chayevin. They're all chayev, man and woman. Chutz. There are three exceptions. What are the three exceptions? Bal takif ubal tashchik. Right? Bal takif is what? Is your peyot. Okay, women don't have Misrayim peyot, therefore they can destroy the corners of their head. And Bal Tashchit, this is the pasuk about the beard. Okay, they don't have a beard. Okay, even if they had a beard, they wouldn't have a problem with cutting off the beard with the razor. Oval titameh lemitim, and also this is the Eshet Kohen. She has no isser of making herself tameh to a mate. A man, a Kohen, is not allowed to make himself tameh to mate. But in Eshet Kohen, she's allowed to become Tameh Lamet. So that's the three exceptions, which is a prohibition that the women don't have. Every other Lo Ta'aseh applies to women down the line. Okay? Gemara says, Ma'anamili, how do we know? So Yehuda Marav, Chen Tan Devei Rishma, Amakra, Ish o Isha ki asu mikol chatat Adam, right? Hashava katuv Isha le'ish. It says ish o isha ki yasu mikol chatat, any type of sin. So it says that what? The man and woman are both forbidden from doing any sin, any prohibitions. Right, any lo ta'aseh. Says the Sefer HaChinuch, shelo la'asot melacha b'yom Shabbat, not to do any melacha on Shabbat, v'noheget b'kol makom, every place in the world, u'chol zman, and for all eternity, by men and by women. Okay, so Shabbat, the Lota says, is forever. Now, Letamemet, talking about Eshet Kohen, a wife of a Kohen, a woman, a Kohen ladies. Should become Letamemet. Yeah, Kohanim are not allowed to, but the women are allowed to. Okay, fine. Now we're going to get into the Mishnah Masechah Shabbat, the 7th parak, that tells us the melachot of Shabbat. Okay, so they're really pretty much set up in the Mishnah in categories. Okay, the first set that is brought down is the order of making bread. And the first 11 melachot is how you make bread. And they consist of zoreah, planting, chorish, plowing, kotzer, harvesting, ma'amer, gathering, dash, threshing, zoreh, winnowing, borer, selecting, tochen, grinding, merakeh, sifting, lash, kneading, and opheh, baking. Those are the 11 that are done with bread. Okay. Then the Mishnah goes into the order of making garments. Okay, so you have gozes, which is sharing, melaban, scouring, menapets, combing, tzurba, dyeing, tova, spinning, mesach, warping threads. Then what do you have? Okay, constructing two heddles, small loops, oreg, weaving, detaching the fabric, kosher, tying, matir, untying, tofer, sewing, and korea, tearing. All those, how many is that? That's 13. 13 melachot about manufacturing garments. You have 11, then you have 13. And then you have the next 7 melachot have to do with the hides, preparing hides, right? The leather, the animal. Tzad, restricting the movement of an undomesticated living creature. Shochet, slaughtering. Mafshit, skinning. Me'ave, tanning. Memachek, smoothing. Mesartet, scoring. And mechater, measured, cutting. Okay, so those all have to do with the hides, preparing hides. And then the last, how many is in the last one? And the last group, consisting of 8 melachot, are other melachot that are done for the construction of the Mishkan. Kotev, writing, mochek, erasing, boneh, building, soter, demolishing, mechabe, extinguishing a flame, ma'avir, kindling a fire, ma'akev apatish, final blow to complete the vessel, and hotza'ah, transferring an object. So those get you to 39 melachot. Okay, so again, if you want to remember how the Mishnah sets it up, first it talks about the 11 of making bread, then the 13 of making garments, then the 7 for the hides, and then the 8 for the construction of the other melachot, the construction in the Mishkan. Okay, now we use the word avot. So the Gemara in Masechet Baba Kama tells us a implication. When you use the word avot, it means something. What does that mean? And source number 6. Gabe Shabbat Tanan. Avot melachot arba'im hasirahat. They're 40 minus 1, they're 39. Now what does it mean? Avot. Meklad yika toldot. It means that you have toldot. Avot means father. Av melachot. And then you have toldot, children melachot. Okay, so you have av melachot and you have toldot. So how do you define what a tolda is, or what difference does it make if a melacha is a tolda versus a melacha being an av? Okay, is there a difference? What would be the difference? Why is something called an av? Why is something called a tolda? So let's see. The Gemara says tolatein keyotzabehen lo shana av hatat lo shana tolda hatat. It makes no difference if a person does an av melacha, or he does a tolda melacha. They both have to bring a chatat. They both have to bring a carbon. They did a b'shoigeg. Lo shana av sekila, and if he did it on purpose and there's witnesses and everything, he gets skila. But lo shana tolda, if he did a tolda, you want to call a subcategory, he did a tolda, he did a child melacha, he also would get sekila if there was witnesses and everything. So ma'ika ben av tolda. So the Gemara asks, what's the difference between an av and a tolda? It says nafkamina is as follows. The ilu of ichte avot bahade hadade. If a person did 2 avot in one lapse of unawareness, he forgot that this was asur, and then he forgot that was asur, and he did both of them, 2 different avot, right? So what would happen? He would have to bring two korbanot, because he did 2 separate avot. Inami shtei todot bahade hadade mechayev akol chada v'chada. So he has to bring it for each and every av, or each and every tolda. What will be the difference? But ilu avid av v'tolda didav, and if he did the av and its tolda, then lo mechayev el hada. Then he only be hayav only 1 korban. So that's the nafkamina, the first nafkamina the Gemara brings. That what? There's really no difference between av and a tolda. You did an av, you did a tolda, it's the same isur, and you get the same punishment. If you did it b'shogeg, you did it by accident, you bring a carbon. If you did it on purpose and the witnesses and all, you get sekila. What's the difference? Every av you do and every tolda you do, you have to bring a korban for it. But if you did the av and its tolda in one lapse of unawareness, then you would only bring 1 korban. Okay, that's the first nafkamina. Now, there's another opinion in the Gemara that says, "O Rabbi Eliezer de mechayev atoda b'makom av." He says Rabbi Eliezer holds doesn't make a difference. You did an av, you did a toda, you did them together. You still bring for each one separately. So amai karale av, amai karale toda. So why are you calling one an av? Why are you calling one a tolda? If according to Rabbi Eliezer, you always bring a korban for each thing, no matter if it's the same tolda, the same av. You always bring. So why is it called one and the other one? Here he says, whatever was considered the primary way of doing it in the Mishkan. Okay, so in this malacha, what was done in the Mishkan, that's considered the av. Whatever is similar to it is its tolda. Okay, whatever is considered, whatever done in the Mishkan was its Av, whatever is similar to it, it's Tolda. But they're both the same Isur. Okay, Karele Av. Hach, the Lav Mishkan Chashiva. What wasn't its Chashiv in the Mishkan, wasn't the significant way of doing it in the Mishkan. Karele Tolda. And it's similar to it, gets a Lashon of Tolda. So for a moment, let's take a look at the Pirush HaMishnah Rambam on source number 7. The Rambam says, V'ha Tolda. You want to know what a Tolda is? Think about it in your heart. Al Totzaot Pu'ulot Otam Melacha Amnuya Ba'avot. Take a look of the result of the Av. Okay, if you do the Av, what result do you get? B'chol makom shetimtza ota pu'ula zehu tolda le'ota ha'av. That what is similar to what that leads to the same result is its tolda. Kigon, and he gives an example that make it a little bit more simple, right? Kigon zeh she'amarnu shetochan me'avot melachot, right? They used to grind the stuff to make the dyes. They would grind the herbs to make dyes for the Mishkan. So the grinding, which was done, that's the Av. But what's grinding? Says the Rambam. Ve'inyan tochan hu tehinat chelek gadol ve'fechato chelekim ketanim. To take something big and make it small. That's grinding. Okay? So now, the fikach, chituch hayerakot b'Shabbat, if you dice very small on Shabbat, it's asur. Why? Because it's a tolda. That's what grinding is. Grinding is taking from big and making it small. So although grinding is grinding, but there's other things that make from big to small, that's a tolda. That's the way the Rambam explains what a tolda is. Or cutting wood in order to take its sawdust. Or shaving metal in order to take its dust. Or splitting wood for firewood. Each of these are a tolda of grinding. Okay? Same too, the concept of cooking is to soften hard items. Therefore, right, cooking is taking something hard, unedible, making it soft and edible. So he says anything that takes something soft, hard and makes it soft is a tolda. For example, melting one of the metals or heating it up is a tolda of cooking. Okay? So
you don't have almost zero about it. Don't do hide, you don't do only maybe that's right. You have zero sort of it.
okay, so fine. Let's say that's the case. Doesn't make a difference. The halacha remains the same. There's no difference in av and tolda. The same punishment, exact same punishment, exact same din. It's just what is it's what is classified as an av and what's classified as a tolda. So the Rambam's explanation of av and tolda is av is what was done in the Mishkan, and the tolda is when you do anything that gets you similar results. Okay? That's the way the Rambam explains it. Now, this is not in your Tzurba. This is something that I was learning on the side that I think a lot of people have this question is, what does the Mishkan building really have to do with Shabbat? I understand the Psukim are mentioned about Shabbat during the Mishkan, but what's the connection? Why is it dafka these 39 melachot that are done in the Mishkan is what is asur to do on Shabbat? So here in this beautiful sefer, I would also, if you have the time to go through such a sefer, I don't have the time, but I try to go through it. Hilchot Shabbat, the inside story from Gemara to Halacha by Moshe Kaplan. It's a beautiful sefer. He does a great job going from the each melacha and going through the Gemara. It's similar to what we do in the Tzurba, but it's more in depth. And in here, in his Akdama, he brings an answer to based on the Vilna Gaon and others of what is a connection of Shabbat in the Mishkan. That he says over here. And he brings from the Iyun Tefillah, explain the Vilna Gaon's words. He says, what's Shabbat? Shabbat is Hashem created the world, and on Shabbat he rested. Okay? Hashem created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. And that's why we rest on the Shabbat. He says, however, God is so above comprehension that we must ask, how could we know what type of labors were involved in creating the world? How did Hashem create the world? Hashem said, Hashem ke'ilu, kaviyachol, he worked, as if he worked, right? So what did he do that was considered work that we're supposed to rest? because we're supposed to copy Hashem, emulate Hashem, we're supposed to rest. He rests, so we rest. So why are we resting? So he says over here, we wouldn't know which type of labor we're involved in creating. We must therefore abstain, and what we have to abstain for Shabbos. We cannot possibly ascribe any labor. So what then should be our basis for resting on Shabbat? So he says, based on the Vilna Gaon, Hashem gave us the answer in the form of the Mishkan. What's the Mishkan? The Mishkan is a microcosm of the universe. It's the whole, it's like the whole universe. We got to create the Mishkan. Was Hashem Shechina is there. The whole world is in there. The creation of the Mishkan was a reflection of the creation of the world. Okay? The 39 categories of labor used to construct the Mishkan are representative of the 39 aspects of labor which God created the world, whatever that means. Okay? But Ki'ilu, the building of the Mishkan showed us what was used to create the world. So when Hashem rested, that's what he rested from, and that's what you're resting from. That's the way he explains it over here. And he says that the Baal HaTurim points out there are 39 verbs in the Torah's account of creation corresponding to these 39 categories of melacha. Like in the story of the creation of the world, there's 39 verbs, action words, right? And those represent the 39 melachot. Right? So that's just very interesting, the connection over here of the Mishkan and Shabbat, which is a miniature replica of the world at large. That's the Mishkan. That's how you know what you're supposed to do. I felt it was a very nice chidush, a very nice explanation of the connection. Okay, now that we did this and we understand what an Av and a Tolda is, now we're going to move on. Let's go into Deoraita and Derabanan, page 251. All Avot, so let's read the box over there. All Avot and Toldot are classified as biblically forbidden activities, or malachot Deoraita. An Av and a Tolda, they are Deoraita Asur, Malacha Deoraita. But the halachot of Shabbat also contain many Derabanans. For each category of Malacha and Shabbat, we're going to have to learn to differentiate between Midoraita and Midrabanan. Which one is the Oraita? Which one is the Derabanan? So the Rambam is telling us how the Chachamim worded the Hilchot of Shabbat. Chazal employ the term Chayav in the context of violations of Shabbat to indicate full culpability for violating Shabbat. If the act was shogeg, the person is obligated to bring a sin offering. And if the act was fully conscious, the person is subject to execution. This term contrasts with the term patur, which is employed to describe an action which is prohibited only derabanan. Okay, look at the Rambam. He's going to explain it again. Let's take a look. Kol makom shene'emar b'hilchot Shabbat she'oseh davar zeh hayav, harei zeh hayav karet. It means it's hayav karet. Whenever it says hayav, it means this is a deoraita. And if you did it, and there's no witnesses that can put you to death, or today you don't have a Sanhedrin Katan that can put a person to death, he gets hayav karet. And if there were witnesses on hatra and there was a bet in, hayav skila. And if he did it by accident, then it's hayav hatat. That means it's deoraita. When you use a lashon hayav, that means it is deoraita. B'chol makom, go anywhere. Shnetzah she'oseh davar zeh patur. When it says patur, right? So patur, harei zeh patur min hakaret u'min haskila min hakarban. Aval asur la'asot oto. So it's patur aval asur. Okay, patur meaning you're not going to be chayav skila, not karet. You're not going to be chayav korban because it's not deoraita. It's the Rabbanan, but it's still asur. Okay, so when you use a lashon patur, it doesn't mean that it's allowed. Patur aval asur. Allah asot oto davar b'Shabbat v'asuro midivrei sofrim v'hu hachakam min hamalacha. In order to take us away from doing sin, okay, in order to do the malacha. So there is the Rabbanans. So whenever we use the word patur, that lets you know that it is the Rabbanan. Whenever you have the hayav, that's how you know it's the oraita. That's when Chazal is speaking. That's how they tell us to us. Now, why was some things made as a derabanan? Why did the Chachamim come and make derabanan? Well, you don't have enough 39 avot malachot, and then anything that's similar to it is it told out and it's doraita, and then the Chachamim come and add more derabanan. Lama, why we know this? So says the Rambam, Ne'emar b'Torah that a person has to have a teshuvot, he has to rest. Okay? He has to come to a rest on Shabbat. Afil midvarim she'enan melacha chayav l'shvut mehen. You have to come to rest from them. Okay? This is similar to the Ramban, who says that Shabbaton, the word Shabbaton, comes from the lesson of shvut, which means to rest. And so the Rabbanan came and put in gezerot, stuff in order to make us rest. We saw this Ramban before, earlier, in one of the earlier shiurim. The Rambam writes, technically, a person can do many stuff on Shabbat that are not really isurim of the avot, of the melachot, but yet it's laborious, okay? And he can be busy with different things. And he's not going to come to any rest on Shabbat because he's busy with things that are mutar, but takes away from the spirit of Shabbat. Says the Rambam one of this, in order to rest. That's why they're called shivut, is because the Chachamim came, and that's when it says shivut, that means it's the Rabbanan. Why? Because the Rabbanan wanted us to come and rest, to have a shivut, to have a resting on Shabbat. Some of them are because they're similar to melachot, okay? They resemble. They're not necessarily the same, but they resemble melachot. Because maybe if you continue doing it, you end up doing something else that will give you an isur sikila. So here in the laws of Shabbat, on page 310, he sums this up very nicely. He says the Chachamim instituted many additional prohibitions to the Melchot and Todot of Shabbat. 3 of them. Acts which undermine the spirit and sanctity of Shabbat. Meaning, technically, they're really permissible, but if you did them, you wouldn't really have a Shabbat. You wouldn't be resting. You would just be busy with other things, and it wouldn't be Shabbat. So they make gezerot on those. Acts which resemble melacha, and acts which may lead to Torah violations. Okay, so those are the 3 that Chachamim made gezerot in order to keep us away from these isurim, in order to keep Shabbat correctly. Okay, now, today, at this point, our goal is to we're not going to get a full understanding of any of these topics right now, but is to get our feet a little wet to these topics. So next time we hear them, as we go through the Melachot, we'll be familiarized with these concepts. The Melachot that were done in the Mishkan. What type of Melachot? What type of work was it? What type of work was it? What do you mean by creative?
You take raw material.
So it's like an artisan type of work, right? When an artist works, how does he work? Not modern art, talking about like real art. Okay? How does an artist work? They work very carefully. Is what Chachamim call melechet machshevet. You're planning, you think about it, you do it. And how do? You do it the right way. Okay? You want to make something right? You want it to be perfect, right? German craftsmanship, right? You want to get the perfect the stuff, right? Made in good old USA, right? Well, I don't know if that's good or not, but you want perfect craftsmanship when you weren't making important things, especially you're making the Mishkan, which is a place of where the Shekhinah is going to be. You want to make it perfect. So the malacha was done in a perfect way.
When they made the Lincoln Memorial, they brought in some Italian
to do it. Okay, the Americans didn't know how to do it, so they brought in the Italians. Okay, that's how people, like these rich people, like just to segue for 1 second. Like rich people, when they build a house, they want to import the tiles from Italy, and they want to get the metal work from here, and they want to get it from there. They want to get the best. You want the melechet machshevet. You don't want the Chinese knockoff version. Okay, you want the real stuff. So when it was done in the Mishkan, So when you're doing the malacha in the Mishkan, it was the Melechet Machshevet. It was malacha that was done with calculation, done properly, done right. So let's take a look over here. In addition to the specific terms which define each individual malacha, all malachot are also defined by an overarching general principle which define whether a given act is a malacha or not. Any given act of malacha is written by Torah only when performed as a melechet machshevet, deliberative, constructive act that must fulfill these general conditions. If you didn't do it in this way, then technically it's not a malacha. Okay? Now, it might still be an Isser Dirabanan because it resembles a malacha. It leads to the same results of a malacha. So the Chachamim came and made it Asr, but technically it's not the malacha. Because the malacha in the Mishkan was done machshevet, done calculated and precise. For example, so let's take a look. The first one we're going to talk about is the what makes something not a melechet machshevet is shinui. The principle of a shinui. What's a shinui? You do it in a different way, right? Because if you're soldering two pieces of metal, whatever you're doing, you're going to do it with your proper hands. You're not going to come with your elbow and start pushing things. And you're doing artsmanship, you're doing craftsmanship, but you're using your proper tools and the proper ways of doing it. So the minute you start to do it in a weird way, this is no longer melechet machshevet. Okay, this has now become not a malach. Saying, right, you're not doing it the way they did in the Mishkan, which was with perfection and craftsmanship. Okay, so take a look. There's right. So the Chachamim came made it usher. When can we do it? We'll see. When Shinoi. We'll talk a little bit about that today. All right, so let's take a look. Tzech Shabbat says, Hakotev shtei otiyot. Person writes two letters, ben b'mino, ben b'smolo, whether he writes it with his right hand or with his left hand. Ben mishem echa, ben mishtei shemot. Using the ben mishtei seminot b'chol lashon chayev. Whether they were the same letter or two different letters, whether he does it with two different types of ink in any language, he is liable. And the Gemara says, 1 second. In order to make him mechayev with the right hand, I understand, because people write with the right hand. But 1 second. Why would he be chayev on the left hand? Because you don't write with your left hand. It's a shinoi. So we're talking about someone who is a lefty. So if he does it with his left, or someone who is ambidextrous, he can use two hands to write. Okay, in such a case, then right and left would be actual malacha. Right, but how do you write? How do you create letters? The guy has to create letters. How is he creating his letters? With his right hand. Therefore, if you did it with the left hand, it's now a shinui. Now, a shinui is an issa d'rabbanan. Okay? Now, it is, but it's not the way they created in the Mishkan. It's not a melechet machshevet.
Doesn't come.
You're a jeweler, right? When you're a jeweler, right?
If I use the other way, that will not possible.
Exactly.
But here we are doing it.
Okay. So there are Rishonim and there are Mefarshim that say like you. They say shinoi is not just you're doing it with a different finger or a different hand. A shinoi has to be where the results are not the same. Because if the results are the same, then it's not a shinoi. There are those who hold that way. We don't necessarily hold that way.
Yeah, but
okay, we don't necessarily hold that way. When we say you could do a shinoi, we don't say the results have to be different. Okay, we don't say that. But there are those who say like, but we don't hold that way. We say if you're allowed to do a shinoi, it's just done differently, even if the results are the same.
It could be a letter A, a letter B, olive, B.
Okay. Fine. Now,
Not a perfect.
but you understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Good. So now let's move. Source number 11. The Mishnah Berurah brings in the Chai Adam, tells us 1 second. Left and right hand, using the left hand is not always a shinui. Okay? Losing left hand is not always a shunim. Right? And he says, why? Why is that? Why is it that if a person does other melachot, because think about it, hota'ah, taking something out, carrying something out on Shabbat, which is a malach, does it make a difference if I carry it in my right hand or my left hand?
No.
No. And it's not considered a shinui. Sometimes I carry my left hand, sometimes I carry my right hand. Writing, I always write with my right hand. So the minute I go to my left hand, that's a shinui, right? So therefore they say, if you have to use a shinui when using a phone on Shabbat, if you're calling for help or something, whatever the story is, we'll see. If you have to use a shinui, if it's an emergency, not an emergency, whatever. But let's say a guy has to use a shinui and he has to use the phone. So for example, the same thing, the cell phone, you can technically start it with your left hand, right? And you can open it and stuff like that, right? So it may not be considered a shinoi. It may not be considered a shinoi using the left hand because you can do it, right hand, left hand. Hey, sometimes your right hand's busy and you want to go on your phone. You're using your left hand. So it is a possibility. So therefore, says the Mishnah Berurah, left hand being a shinoi comes only by writing, not necessarily by the other melachot. Okay, now, Masechah Shabbat, Daf Tzadik Bet, tells us what about one who carries something on his head, all right? So it tells us it's potter. Potter abul asa, right? You're not allowed to do it, but it's potter if you did. It's not considered a malach. So he says it's shinoi, right? So Rabbi Gavril wants to say what? You go to India, they're all carrying things on their head. Okay, Arabs. Then they have, what else should they use their head for? Oh man, I really got to censor this one, David. Okay, so he says, so why don't we say that it's not considered a shinoi if they're balancing it on the head because people balance on the head. So he says, the Gemara says, "Vatla datan etzel kol adam." Right, the majority of the world use their head for other things and not just balancing things on their heads. So therefore, we would not say that that's the normal way of doing it, and it's butter. Okay, but again, it is butter of asa. Okay, now we're going to move on to a moment still in shinui, but the question here is: so we know that you're not allowed to use a shinui. Shinui and Shabbat is still us. What about if you have a dangerous situation? You have a chola sheyesh bo sakon. Okay, so someone is very sick. Once happened, I was in shul and a person fainted and fell, and we tried to wake him up. He wasn't waking up. Okay, so now you have to call Hatzalah. You have to call. So what do? Do I have to put the phone on with my nose? Do I have to? Do I go straight on and I call? So let's take a look. Everyone's saying great. So let's take a look. Says the Shulchan Aruch in source 13, page 255. Okay. Says the Shulchan Aruch. You have to be Mechal Shabbat for someone sheyesh bo sakana. We try to we try not to have the labors performed by goyim, minors or women, but rather you want to do those malachas that are necessary to be done by adult male. What Shulchan Aruch is trying to say, don't think. Save the guy. Don't try to give it on someone. You're custom. Come here. You turn on the phone. You dial that solid. You need to get the help. You call. You do it. Interestingly, is the Ramah. The Ramah says the yesh omrim the im afsher laasod v'lo dichui v'lo ichor al yidei shinoi oisa al yidei shinoi.
Yeah.
Okay. If doing it with a shinoi won't make it won't make it late, and won't change how you're getting help, then do it with a shinoi. That's the Ramah. So the Ramah says, again, the Ramah says you have to save a guy, and if you could do it with a shinoi and it won't take away from your help, you should do it with a shinoi.
If you can punch the phone with the left hand, like usually you don't do it, good. And it comes the same thing, it's good.
But he was talking about CPR.
Okay.
not too bad.
Source 14. Source 14. It says in Mishnah Berurah, anything that you can do in a permissible way, we do not cast aside the permitted and act in a forbidden way. And it appears likewise. If the matter is postponed a little, right, with the shinui, let's say we'll take an extra second or extra 2 seconds or whatever it is. But the illness will not become exasperated. It won't become worse. The guy can't get worse than where he is right now. Now, you're not a medical professional. You can't make that call. But let's say you know this. Okay? For example, I'll give you an example. A lady who's going into labor. There's usually time to get there, right? And 1 extra second on the phone will probably not change anything in the final result. Okay? Okay? This is something like that.
Well, depends what you call it.
I'm saying most times you still get there, you're waiting in the waiting room, you're waiting on the bed, you're waiting on this, and then finally the baby makes its arrival. Okay? So it's something that takes time. So your 1 minute in the phone call won't make a difference. It says in Mishnah Berurah, that's also, so it's not only if it's not delayed, but also if it won't change how the help comes and what happens, it's also you should do with the shinui. Okay? Yeah, you know, it's but normally that's wouldn't change the condition or anything. We do delay slightly in order to do it with the shinoi, which is only rabbinically prohibited. So the Mishnah Berurah says if it won't change the illness, then you can delay by doing a shinoi. Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata also says this: when violating Shabbat in order to save a human life, one should limit as much as possible the performance of prohibited acts. All right, as long as there's no concern that this will negatively influence a sick person's condition. If it's going to influence the sick person, it's going to make him worse because you are going to be machmer and using shinois, then you shouldn't use the shinoi. One should also limit as much as possible the severity of the prohibition, which means if it's possible to save the patient with only violating a rabbinic prohibition, it's better to do it than doing a biblical prohibition, right? By using a shinoi. If you can't, sometimes if it's, remember, a malacha is only if it's done by 1 person. If it's done by 2 people, it's not a true malacha anymore. So maybe you should both put on the phone together. If it's, if that won't take away from the time as well. Okay. In any case, where there is concern on top of page 256, that all these limitations will bring about delay and harm, or they'll be weakened because of them, then one should ignore them. And one should perform everything for the benefit of the patient as one went on a weekday in order to save them. Okay? So, according to Ashkenazim, according to the Ramah, Mishnah, Berurah, Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, if using a shinoi will not cause any harm to the patient, whether it's delay, whether it's not delayed, whether it's whatever, as long as it doesn't make any harm to the patient, use the shinoi. If it's going to cause harm to the patient, then go straight up. What about the Yalkut Yosef? So he brings over here in Yalkut Yosef, source number 16 over here. And he said, some say that when we violate Shabbat for one who is dangerously ill, one needs to perform the melacha with the shinoi, and not in their typical manner if it will not cause any concern of delay and a chance of increased danger. So that's the Ramah. The Mishnah Berurah. Therefore, when making a telephone call on Shabbat for the need of saving life, one should lift the phone receiver with a shinoi, such as with one's elbows. For instance, back in the time when they had phone receivers, you picked it up. And some say, okay, now he's only if you're doing it for a pregnant lady who's giving birth. Right. Says Yalkut Yosef, when it's a makom sekana, don't start making cheshbanot. It's going to change it. It's not going to change it. Make a shinui. That no, go ahead and do it the proper way. When do you start using a shinui? When it's not necessarily a sakana. Okay, so here in the Yalkut, just English lesson number 3 on page outside the Tzurba, on page 62, it writes as follows: what happens now? We're talking about she'ein bo sakana. So you have a chola she'ein bo sakana. יש אומרים שמותר לעשות לצורך חולה שאין בו סכנה גם מלאכות האסורות מן התורה אם עושה אותם בדרך שינוי. Right? There are those who hold that if you have a חולה שאין בו סכנה, you're allowed to do for them melacha as long as you're doing it with a shinui. They argue that since one performs it שמאחר במלאכה נעשה בדרך שינוי, אין בזה איסור אלא בדרבנן. ונחשב כאיסורי שבות, המותרים לצורך חולש, אין בו סכנה. So it's like a derabanan, and you're allowed to do shinoi when it comes to the Rabbanan for a cholesh ein bo sakana. So, for example, a pregnant lady, okay? So she has a medical condition. She's not a sakana. She's ein bo sakana. That's why he wrote. That's why he's saying about the pregnant lady. Tzarech yuledet. She's not a sakana at that point.
She's considered to be sakana, but because you know the condition, then
No,
you're allowed.
that's the Mishnah Berurah. That's the Shabbat. He does not saying that here. He's saying when it's sakana, b'shachum sheyesh b'hem sakana, and tzarich la'asot b'shinui. Okay, so you're debating if a person in labor. Okay, so let's say you're right. Let's say you're right. I don't see it that way, but let's say you're right in the reading.
He doesn't say she'en b'sakana, or he doesn't include her in b'sakana.
But he's making that differentiation
because you know
why?
Because you know
he's saying like the Mishnah Berurah.
Because you know the condition that she's in
So
contract.
he's saying like the Mishnah Berurah.
That's what you can understand.
Okay, let's just go through this piece. 1 second. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say you're right. Let's just go for a second. Cholash ein bo sakana. Okay, exactly the definition of who's not a sakana. Someone who's not going to die. He's not in a case that he's going to die. Okay. Here's an example. Here's a fever. Someone who is diabetic. Okay, depending on how far along what's going on with them, right? If they might be cholash, otherwise if they're just counting their carbs and stuff like that, they're not, right? You have to look. We'll Be'ezrat Hashem again. Today our job is not to know all the details. Today our job is to get an overview. Okay, just to say. So there's cholash ein bo sakana. Can you do a malacha minatora through a shinui? So some say yes. Some say no. The only time you can do a shinui for a cholash ein bo sakana only if the original malacha is the rabbanon. Okay, but he says ve'ikr lahach b'zeh she efshar b'derech acher. Says the Yaakov Yosef that if you have no other way, and the cholash ein bo sakana, you can do even a shinui on a malacha minator. Okay, even on a malacha d'oraisa. Okay, you can technically do a shinui even for cholash ein bo sakana. Okay, now that we did this, the next two pieces, it's really an add-on over here.
Yeah.
About nowadays in Eretz Yisrael, even outside, depending which communities you live in, the dangers of the community of especially today the anti-Semitism is skyrocketed, and it's terrible, and people unfortunately we have to protect ourselves, and walking around with guns and other things like that if the community that you live in require it, even if you don't have an Arab, and stuff like that. Again, in these type of places, you would have to use certain things in order to protect Jewish life. Obviously, then you would do what needs to get done to protect the Jewish life. And the chief rabbinate of Israel, they give instructions to the IDF what can't, and what needs to be done, how they should do it, stuff like that. Okay. If it's needed, yeah.
Yeah.
If it's needed. What? If it's needed. What do you mean? If it's pekuach nefesh, yeah, sure. Someone asked me here about carrying his gun on Shabbat, and I told him, which group are you part of? He says part of Shomer, Shmir, or something like that. I said they have a rabbinical board there. You should take your question to them, okay? Because I don't know. You have to really know, is this community such a community that requires a gun on presence? Is it not? Yeah, these are not up to me to make these decisions. I'm already beyond that. This is already beyond me. So you have to go to their proper channels and ask poskim who know what they're talking about. So he asked me, I told him to refer to the experts in these matters. But it would depend on this. It would depend. It's pekuach nefesh. It's not pekuach nefesh. How much of it? How much is not? What's the issue of the community and the state and stuff like that? And if it's determined, like in certain parts of Eretz Yisrael today, you have to be very careful. These terrorists will show up anywhere. You have to have protection, and it will become hard to do this. Okay, now, all right, we have 15 more minutes, and we have to try to finish this up. So we're probably going to do a little bit of a. Okay, let's see what we can do. The next thing.
We're not doing 17, 18?
No, we're on page 259. Malacha she'ena tzichat. What we talked about outside was that Malacha she'ena tzricha leguf. What does the word malacha she'ena tzricha legufa mean? It is a malacha where you're not doing it for the reason the malacha is there. How can I explain this? Let's take a look. Let's take a look over here in the Mishnah in source 19. Someone who carries out a corpse on a bed is hayav. It's a deoraita. V'chein kazayit min hameh. V'chein kazayit min nevela. Okay, is chayav. Rabbi Shimon poter. Rabbi Shimon says it's poter, aval asur. So what's going on? He's taking out a corpse. Why are you taking out this corpse?
Because you take the house.
Doesn't want the house to smell.
Yeah.
You want to remove. Hotza'ah, you taking something out was usually you take something out in order to bring it to that destination. Okay, that's what was done in the Mishkan. It was you took something to bring it somewhere, to bring it from point A to point B. The question is, if I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not doing it to bring it to the destination, I'm doing it to remove it from my house. Okay, this now becomes what's known a malacha she'en tzicha legufa. You're not doing it for the reason that of the malacha. Okay, in this instance, the person, look at the box, second box in the orange box, in second line. In this instance, this person is not carrying the item for its own sake in order to bring it somewhere specific, which is the usual purpose of carrying. Rather, this person is performing the act to achieve a different result, so that the unpleasant odor will not be in the home. So according to the first Tana, one is liable even in this case. Malacha she'en tzricha legufa, you're still chayiv. Chayiv karet, chayiv skila, chayiv carbon. But Rabbi Shimon holds that what? Malacha she'en tzricha legufa, if you're not doing it for the reason of the malacha, then you're not chayav, you're patur, aval asur. Okay? Now, what exactly does it mean? She'en tzricha legufa. So Rashi, it says, and any labor which is not necessary for yourself. We want to take it away, right? So the question is, you want it here or you don't want it here? That's the difference. Malacha that means you want it. Means you don't want it. Okay, I'm doing the malacha, but I don't want it for the reason of the malacha. Now, Tosfot has a different understanding. Is malacha tzricha legufa, malacha she'en tzricha legufa? And he says tzricha legufa means that's what it was done in the Mishkan for. If you're not doing it for the same reason it was done in the Mishkan, then it's not tzricha legufa. Ki hatzarich shayetza malacha naaset b'shvilo b'Mishkan. Hu gufa malacha v'shorsho. That's the malacha tzricha legufa. Now, what's the din with she'en tzricha legufa? You're doing a malacha not for its reason of the malacha. You're doing it to remove it, not to take it there. What would be the halacha? The Rambam writes, look at the Rambam in source 22. Kol ha'oseh malacha b'Shabbat. Afapi she'eno tzicha legufa shemalacha chayav aliyah. He is chayav. Holds like Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai. The first opinion in the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, and he's saying that malacha she'en tzicha legufa is chayav. However, both the Ravad and the Rashba say, Ravad says, Rabbeinu Chanano, Pasak Rabbi Shimon. Like Rabbi Shimon, that it's patur. Rashba also says, Kaiman Rabbi Shimon, the patur, it's also patur. They have a machlok Rishonim here, Rambam, Rashba, and the Ravad. And Rabbeinu Chanano. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch, talking about trapping animals and extinguishing, right? Why would you trap an animal for the Mishkan?
Sure.
To use its hides. Okay. Why are we trapping a bug that's flying into our sukkah? So it's not the same reason, right? So now it becomes malacha she'en tzricha legufa. What about extinguishing? What about extinguishing? Extinguishing was done in the Mishkan for what? To create coals.
Great color.
to create coal, so you can have a coal. Okay, charcoal. Now, if I want to extinguish something, right? Why am I extinguishing? I'm not extinguishing to make coals. Or
You don't
anything.
want the fire.
I want it out, whatever reason. So now it becomes Melcha she'ena tzicha legufa. So what does Shulchan Aruch say about these two cases? So let's see. Shashatzim, right? That's din l'tzorech. If one traps them for a need, he wants the animal chayav because he wants it. Okay. Shelo l'tzorech. Ostam. He doesn't want it, or he just does it just like that. Patur aval asur. The Rambam chayav. So Shulchan Aruch in his first day says, like the Rash from the Rav and Rabbeinu Chananel, that what? Like Rabbi Shimon, it's patur. It's asur, but it's patur. Okay, and the Shulchan Aruch in the next source, in source 26. All right, so you have if a burning ember is lying in place in which one may be injured, a person may extinguish it. All right, you take out a fire, you can extinguish it, and regardless of whether it's made of metal or wood. But Rambam aser b'shuleitz. Okay, so again, the Rambam he says is aser it, and the his first day that it's mutter to extinguish if you're not doing it for coals. All right, the Mishnah Berurah explains in this case that the concern for safety permits someone to perform an act which would otherwise be forbidden midrabanan. Okay, when it comes to safety, you're allowed to do it, even though it's asur, it's patur aval asur. But if for safety reasons, you would be allowed to do it. But in the view of the Rambam, it would still not be permitted, right? Because it's an actual malach. Okay, take a look at the Mishnah Berurah on source 27.
It's over something.
So let's take a look. The labor of extinguishing the Torah prohibits specifically in order to make coals. But undifferentiated extinguishing is malacha, she'en tzricha legufa, and it's only d'Rabbanan. And in a case of public harm, in which they may be incurred bodily harm, the rabbis did not decree a prohibition. So she'en tzricha legufa is asur d'Rabbanan, and when it comes to harm, the Rabbanan didn't make the isur. That's why you're allowed to take it out if it's coming to harm. But if it's only property damage, it remains prohibited. Okay? So if Rabbi Rosner gave an example that once one of his, I don't know how it happened exactly, but a towel got on fire on Yom Tov or something like that. And so they took the towel and they put it out on the deck. The deck was made out of tiles, not out of wood. Right? So now, right, you wouldn't be able to extinguish the fire. You can let it go out by itself, but you cannot do anything to stop it. Why? Because there's no harm to anyone. It's not going to harm anybody. It's right there. It's going to die out by itself. So you can't extinguish it. Okay? So if it's a danger to damage, you cannot do anything. But if damage to people, you can do something. And the Rambam is the opinion that one is liable from Melcahot into the gufa, and therefore it's forbidden if it's ember of wood, because then wood would be the malacha. If it's not wood, then it's, again, something similar to it. Sotolda, whatever. Fine. And he says the halacha, Kedei Rishona, halacha is like Rabbi Shimon. And the Yalkut Yosef writes, the majority of poskim disagree with the Rambam and rule that a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is only the Rabbanan. Okay? Like Rabbi Shimon. Yeah, patur aval asur. Okay.
In a case of danger, no problem.
Right. Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah brings over here that what? Consider malacha she'ein tzricha legufa as it's not being performed for the constructive purpose of malacha, and he's not intent to extinguish it for its own purpose, but for another reason. All right, or he's allowing a sick person to sleep, or to save oil in the lamp, in the lamp, that not all of it should burn, or he's concerned about the pottery of the lamp that it should not get ruined, or he's extinguishing lit logs because he wants to save them, or he's putting that he's concerned about his property. All these are considered not for the sake, and it is not intent for the purpose of the malacha itself. The same is true for comparable circumstances of the other melachot, such as one who digs a hole but merely needs its dirt, right? You're not digging for the hole, you're digging it for the dirt. So all these will be cases of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, which is patur aval asur. Okay. Okay, and again in the box he writes, in any case, it's important to emphasize again that even according to Rabbi Shimon, malacha she'ein tzricha legufa is normally forbidden, except in exceptional circumstances. Fine. Let's move on to the next case. It's davar she'eno mitkaven. Okay, something that he doesn't have kavana for, right? And what is this very famous case? B'negrida, right? This is where you're doing the dragging. What is it? He's dragging a bench across a field. The field is not necessarily soft, so it may cause a ditch, a furrow in the ground, but it's not what he wants. Okay, so Shulchan Aruch writes in source 30, it's not what you want to do. It's mutar. It's permissible, as long as the labor is not a psik resha, as long as it's not going to happen, not necessarily going to happen. So, therefore, a person can drag a bed, a chair, or bench, whether big or small, as long as one does not intend to make a furrow. He wants to drag the bench. His kavanah is to drag the bench. His kavanah is not to make the furrow in the ground. He's not plowing. He's not trying to plow. This here is plowing. He's not trying to plow anything. He's just carrying it along, and it's not a psik resha, meaning the ground is not soft, that if he carries it, it's definitely going to happen, right? That would not be allowed. But here, it could happen, but that's not what he wants, so therefore it would be allowed. Possible also, right? So I didn't want to get into this. Rabbi Ribbiat does it in his 39 Melcahot Sefer. Like he goes through detail. Why is this not Sir Chalagufa, and why is this one this way, and that's that way? You're right. Today's overview just to get these concepts in, but you're good. They are overlapping. The Shulchan Aruch further says, you're allowed to go on top of grass. You're allowed to walk on top of grass, whether they're wet or dry, since he does not intend to thereby cut them, right? He's not trying to cut the grass. He's not being miskaven to cut grass. He's just walking on it. And it's not necessarily going to cut. It might come off, might not. So it's mutar to walk. Says the Shulchan Aruch Harav, one is permitted to walk on grass on Shabbat, even if he's walking barefoot. And it's possible the grass will get stuck between his toes and between his toes and will get cut. Nevertheless, it's a davar she'emet kaven, and it is permitted. Okay? Shmirat Shabbat kechata, right? It's a person permitted to gently smooth the hairs of his head or his beard, right? And he need not be concerned that he will detach them. He's also permitted to remove food remnants that have become stuck to his beard, provided he's careful not to detach the hairs. Obviously, if you have a comb or a brush that is strong, and it's going to be psik resha, because most people have hair that's going to be very detachable and come off. But he's saying, I believe it's like a cloth comb or a soft comb or something that doesn't tug hard on the hairs, or using it with your own hands. Okay, something like that that's soft. Then you would be allowed to, because you're not mitkaven to pull out the hair, and it's not a psik resha that it's going to get pulled this way. That what? Right. Right. But if it's a psik resha, meaning that if it's going to happen, it's definitely going to happen, then you're not allowed to do it. But if it's not necessarily going to happen, then you're allowed to do it. So I'm telling you. So that's why we're telling you. It's a chachamim telling you, not me. A chachamim telling you that these type of things that are definitely going to happen, you wouldn't be allowed to do. Similarly with brushing the teeth. Now, brushing teeth have other issues on Shabbat as well. But the one of the issues is causing to bleed, right? So it's not necessarily going to bleed. You brush your teeth and you have good oral hygiene, right? On a daily basis, you're brushing, your teeth are not going to bleed. Most people's teeth are not going to bleed when they brush. So brushing teeth on Shabbat, we're not dealing with the other aspects of this problem right now, would not be a problem of psik resha. It's you don't want it. You don't want it to bleed, and it's not necessarily going to bleed, so therefore you're allowed to do it on Shabbat.
What are the problems you were saying?
The foaming, causing foam.
Oh.
Causing foam might be a problem on Shabbat. It's no lad. You're creating something else. There's other issues of brushing teeth on Shabbat. We're not dealing with that today. Let's now move on to psik resha. Okay, we have 3 minutes. I'm not doing this justice, but we're gonna have to just finish it up, and then Mizat Hashem, we have some time in the future, we'll come back to it. Psik resha is what we've been talking about right now. I don't want to do something, but it's going to happen. Right? Psik resha basically was a game they used to play. All right, a toy. You used to take the chicken's head and give it to the kids play with it. Okay. So I want to go give my kid a toy. So I'm going to go cut the chicken's head off, but the chicken's going to die. And that's shochet. That's slaughtering an animal. That's a malach on Shabbat. So that's the psik resha. That's where the whole lashon comes. Psik resha. And that would be asur. Okay. Because definitely it's going to happen. Now there is in psik resha There are other instances that it still may be okay. A psik reisha d'lo nichola, something that he's not happy with, he doesn't want. What does it mean, not happy? Right? What is right? So Rabbi Shimon. What does that mean? Not happy. Do I want it? Don't I want it? If I have something else, right? The case of the hadas and the berries. Okay, in source 39. The Aruch wants to say that psik reisha only applies when he benefits from it. If he's not benefiting from it, there is no psik reisha. Others say no, psik reisha happens everywhere. Chamawadia says that psik reisha on the Rabbanan, if it's lo nichola, maybe that's okay. Others say no, even the Rabbanan it won't be okay. So there are different opinions when it comes to reisha. Some say for two Rabbanans, like cutting like an orange, which is right. The isser is a grape or an olive to make it squeezed, and squeezing is with a squeezer, not necessarily a knife. So you have two Rabbanans, and then you're doing it at psik reisha, it's going to get squeezed, and then maybe over there it's going to be okay. So there's a lot in psik reisha. Whether it goes to Rabbanan, it's a lot of things there. Be'ez Hashem, as you go through each malacha, we'll try to bring down the psik reisha in those cases. Mit asek is another one on page 272. Mit asek is when a person is doing it. Remember, the whole thing, Melechet Achshevet, has to be done with thought. Mit asek is not doing it with thought. He's not thinking about it. He's walking past the light switch and he's, the guy uses the bathroom. You ask him, and he closes the light after he walks out. And you ask him, you Shabbat today? Yes. You allowed to close the light to Shabbat? No. So why'd you do it? He's mitasek. He wasn't thinking. He just did it. There's no chizron das. He's missing knowledge, and he's just doing something. So hold on. So mitasek is that type of thing, right? It's not a machshevet, and therefore it would not be considered a malach. So you would not have to bring a carpenter, right? It's mitasek. There's a difference in shogeg and mitasek. Okay, shogeg, I know it's still usher. I just didn't know that the isser applies now or something like that. Mitasek is when inherent in me, I'm doing it because I didn't even think about it. It's not even a thought. Like I didn't know about it at all. It's like I'm just walking by the light switch and my body shut it off. That's mitasek. Okay, how far does this go? And till how far it goes?
When you are busy with something else,
right. Okay, person will plan to detach the cut plant and he detaches an attached plant. All these things go back and forth. Person means to perform a certain act, but then performs it by accident. Right? What is that? Is it mitasek or not? And then the last one that is also mikalkel, but we're not going to get into that. The last one that we're going to talk for today is grama, right? The grama. A grama, if it happens indirectly, okay? An indirect labor, grama is pater aval aser. And when is grama allowed? Perhaps if it's mixed with other things, okay? If it's mixed with she'ena tzricha legupa. So here's an example of a grama that's mixed with she'ena tzricha legupa. Is when you're not allowed to water the grass on Shabbat. The guy has his sukkah and he has the shlach over the sukkah, and he has water on the shlach. The rain came there and the water didn't go up. Now he wants to open it up. But if he opens it up, it's going to go on the grass, right? That's she'en tzricha legupa, but that's still also you're not allowed to do that. But what happens if it's on my deck and I open the shlach, right, and it goes on my deck? And then it hits the grass. So that's a she'en tzricha legupa. The with a grama, that would be okay. So a lot of concepts here. The last couple we went pretty quick. As we go through the malachos, we will look at them over and over again and get more familiar with it.